Welcome to Beyond the Filter, a podcast about censorship. I'm Brandy.
And I'm Jeremy.
And today we're discussing a set of current events you've probably already heard a bunch about. But oh boy, it's still worth discussing if you care the slightest about the erosion of liberty in the Western world. So let's get into it. On September the 10th of this year, Charlie Kirk was shot in the neck by a sniper while speaking at an outdoor Turning Point USA event at Utah Valley University. If you're unfamiliar with Charlie Kirk, he was a high-profile right-wing personality and activist and CEO of Turning Point USA, an organization that advocates for conservative politics on high school, college, and university campuses. Popular with the MAGA crowd, let's say not so popular with other parts of the population. Have you heard of Charlie Kirk before all this, Jeremy?
I don't really think so. I mean, you hear a lot of these right-wing personalities floating around, but I never really paid any attention to him.
Oh, okay.
So it's been an education for me just learning about all of these things that he was saying, which I was blissfully unaware of.
I find it really interesting that you hadn't heard of him because in the circles I move in, he's quite well known, or infamous rather. But it just goes to show how we all live in our own bubbles, I guess. Kirk's fame and controversial status, together with the broiling shit show of our current political zeitgeist, meant that there was a massive reaction to Kirk's death. Many politicians and celebrities, including Democrats like former Presidents Biden and Obama, and liberal Hollywood stars, condemned the violence and offered sympathy to Kirk's family. Late-night host Jimmy Kimmel, for example, posted the following. Instead of the angry finger-pointing, can we just for one day agree that it is horrible and monstrous to shoot another human? On behalf of my family, we send love to the Kirks, and to all the children, parents, and innocents who fall victim to senseless gun and violence. Anyone who's been keeping up with the news will know why we're highlighting Kimmel's response in particular, but more on that soon. Not everyone was so sympathetic. Kirk was a controversial figure who made enemies out of a lot of people, and many weren't super upset to see him gone, to be honest. Kirk was also a big gun rights activist, which is in fact one of the topics he was debating the moment he was shot. So as you can imagine, there were memes.
And I'm definitely not going to be Googling those memes right now. That would be totally insensitive.
I've already seen a bunch of them. They were kind of swamping my social media feed the moment it happened, but yeah. So I cannot deny the fact that they exist. Anyway, so the calls to lower the temperature from these liberal politicians and celebrities contrasted with some of the reactions from the right. Elon Musk, for instance, responded to the killing by excreting, "The left is the party of murder," and then followed that up with, "If they won't leave us in peace, then our choice is to fight or die." Let it be clear that at the point Musk made these comments, there was no strong evidence regarding who the killer was or what their motivation was. On the same day, Laura Loomer, a political activist who had at points been in Trump's inner circle, at least, declared the left a national security threat and said it was time for Trump to shut down every single leftist organization. And many on the right called any response to Kirk's death that could be construed as mocking or gleeful as a monstrous, inhuman reaction. And as I said, there were certainly people who were gleefully mocking his death. There's no denying that because I saw it. However, houses don't get much more glass than this. While most of the more celebratory reactions to Kirk's assassination were from private figures, like the kind of people that make memes, in previous and very recent incidents of attacks on Democratic figures, mocking reactions came from the top. For example, when the husband of Democrat Speaker Nancy Pelosi had his skull cracked by a hammer-wielding Trump supporter in 2022, Trump himself and his followers responded by mocking the attack and spreading ridiculous conspiracy theories. Trump Jr. posted a Halloween costume based on the attack, and Charlie Kirk himself suggested that the attacker should be bailed out. And only months earlier than the Kirk assassination, Democratic lawmaker Melissa Hoffman and her husband and dog were all murdered by a right-wing attacker. In the immediate wake of this, right-wing influencers and certain Republican reps started spreading conspiracy theories, again blaming the left with no evidence. For instance, Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah again, responded to the killing by posting, "This is what happens when Marxists don't get their way." And again, there was no information at all about the motivation or political leaning of the attacker at this time. Then, on the very same day as the Kirk assassination, there was a shooting in a Colorado high school in which 2 students were wounded before the shooter killed himself. And the shooter was subsequently found to be radicalized by neo-Nazis and white supremacist content online. So it's worth noting in the wake of these right-wing attacks, there were no liberal or left-wing figures with Elon Musk's level of reach declaring that the right is the party of murder or there was time to fight. Yeah.
You could say that it's just words, but then you do have incidents like the raid on the Capitol on January 6th and things like that, which make it very clear that words can incite people to violence. And it seems pretty much like that's the intention of some of this, right? It literally seems some of these people are cheering on another civil war.
That's absolutely what they're doing. No, I think, like, Musk has made comments like this again and again, I'm pretty sure, and he's retweeted comments like this. I'm pretty sure he just wants liberals murdered. Like, I don't think that's that much of a stretch. Anyway, the right-wing reaction to Kirk's death and their reaction to his death went beyond simply voicing outrage and crossed over into wielding state power to punish their enemies and frame the narrative in their favor. On September the 16th, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that visa revocations are underway for any non-US citizen who celebrated Charlie Kirk's killing, saying America will not host foreigners who celebrate the death of our fellow citizens. And so this isn't charges or a trial, it's the State Department using immigration discretion to punish speech. In mid-September, the White House announced an executive order designating Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. Major outlets immediately noted that the US has no mechanism to designate domestic groups this way. Terrorism lists are for foreign organizations, and experts say Antifa isn't even a unitary organization. Like, there's no CEO of Antifa that you can't really... It's not an organization, but
it's
nonetheless...
kind of a phantom, yeah.
Yeah. It just means literally being anti-fascist.
Trump's only just declared in the last couple of days he's going to send in the forces to war-ravaged Portland to battle Antifa. And I know this is one of the things that got Kimmel in hot water, but it almost seems like Kirk's assassination was a gift to the far right to the extent that it can be used to justify these sorts of measures. It's kind of like, they're waiting for something like this to happen before they could charge in with the forces.
That's absolutely what it is. Let's be real. I mean, there are parallels in history to draw to this, which I'll talk about a bit further in this episode. But I think it's pretty clear that a lot of this isn't about them experiencing grief over Kirk's death. I mean, some of them are, I'm sure, but that's not the real reason that this is getting such a huge state-sponsored reaction. Let's be real. And another thing that happened that was, I think is maybe one of the most disturbing things is that when they subsequently started blaming the left for this assassination and started talking about how the left-wing party is the party of violence, at the same time, the DOJ removed a paper from their website showing that the majority of domestic terrorism is in fact right-wing violence. An article called What NIJ Research Tells Us About Domestic Terrorism, which summarized decades of data indicating right-wing extremists account for the majority of ideological motivated killings since the 1990s. The DOJ said the pages are just being reviewed under recent executive order. But it's painfully obvious what's happening. A right-wing figure is assassinated. Various left-wing personalities and major figures start talking about how violence is the domain of the left, and then they remove an article, a scientific article showing that it's in fact more the domain of the right. I mean, could this be any more on the nose? And then getting back to this whole sort of overblown reaction, when the killing occurred, presidential proclamation was ordered that US flags should be put at half-staff nationwide at embassies from September 10th to December 14th as a mark of respect for Charlie Kirk. And multiple states echoed the order or insisted on their own notices. A public funeral was held at State Farm Stadium for Kirk, attended by the President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance. Trump took the opportunity to state that the bullet that killed Kirk was aimed at everyone in the stadium and that he was killed for expressing the views that everyone in the stadium holds. It's like, holy shit. It's something out of a TV show, like a badly written TV show. And then the US Senate introduced a resolution to mark Kirk's birthday, a national day of remembrance for Charlie Kirk. And there are further bills being introduced outlining plans to rename a highway after Kirk, have commemorative Kirk coins minted, and to force every public university to build a Charlie Kirk Memorial Plaza, complete with statues in various poses, with monthly fines for campuses that don't comply.
What are the poses? I'm so curious.
I didn't look that deep, but I just read multiple poses that they were meant to all be put together in. I'm assuming the sort of like the who knows? Who knows?
I can imagine some malicious compliance there, some scope for putting him in, with his head up his ass. Oops, sorry, I didn't say that.
Yeah.
Disrespectful. Disrespectful.
Yeah. I was about to say you're
cancelled.
Are you there on a visa at the moment? You might want to cut that out. Okay, so now let's look at the contrast. Months ago, when Minnesota's Melissa Hoffman, a Democrat and former state House Speaker, was assassinated, again, by a MAGA guy, Minnesota lowered their flag statewide, but Washington did not. No national half-staff order was issued from the White House. And when asked if he would be contacting Minnesota Governor Tim Walz in the wake of the murders, Trump gave a characteristically empathetic and mature response. Should I try and imitate him? Whenever people quote him, they always imitate him. Okay, I'll try. I can't do his voice. Can you do his voice?
No.
I'm going to sound like Grover.
I
think the governor of Minnesota is whacked out. I'm not calling. I could be nice and... I can't do it. Okay, I'll say what he said. I can't say what he says normally, though, because everything he says is so ridiculous. All right. I think the government of Minnesota is so whacked out. I'm not calling. I could be nice and call, but why waste time? That was just an American accent, but
It wasn't terrible. That was all right.
Thanks. But yeah, a politician was assassinated by one of his supporters, and he said even giving a phone call to sort of lower the temperature or offer any sympathy was a waste of his time. That is just beyond the pale of holy shit. The funny voice was necessary, but still, that's just fucking appalling. And I'd again like to take this opportunity to remind listeners that Charlie Kirk himself was not a politician or a lawmaker. He was a guy that debated college students.
For a long time, I actually assumed that he was the guy in the Prove Me Wrong meme, the guy who's sitting at that desk on a college campus. But I found out it was someone else. Do you know who it actually is, Brandy?
That's Steven Crowder. There's exactly. Like a bunch of these guys.
They blur together, yeah.
Yeah. I think last I heard of Steven Crowder, he'd been found on video, I think, emotionally abusing his pregnant wife. No big surprise there, I think, if I recall correctly. So there's that. Anyway, but of course, there was one particular reaction to that reaction that drew the most attention. In the days after the assassination, late-night host Jimmy Kimmel addressed the murder in his opening monologue. Kimmel once again condemned the killing and violence, and at no point did he attack Kirk himself. Then he moved on to talk about the right-wing reaction to the assassination. He pointed out that the MAGA gang were doing everything in their power to paint the assassin as anything but a fellow MAGA. I'd like to point out that he never actually said the assassin was MAGA. He just accurately indicated that MAGA immediately jumped to painting them as left-wing when there was still no strong evidence either way at the time. He then went on to show a clip of being asked how he felt about the loss of Kirk, in which Trump seemed much more interested in talking about his new ballroom rather than Kirk. Kimmel said that Trump was mourning Kirk in the way a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish. Now, if you're not a late-night watcher, you might not be aware of the ongoing beef Trump has, not only with Kimmel, but most of late night. Trump is the subject of nightly jokes by almost all late-night hosts, who arguably do more to highlight his antics and hypocrisy than a lot of mainstream news outlets. Let's just say Trump does not like this, and he has made multiple posts ranting about how he wants late night shut down. During his first term, Trump had his aides call Disney to demand action on Kimmel's jokes. So it was particularly suspicious when Kimmel's show was indefinitely suspended by ABC and Disney following this rather mild monologue. Even more suspicious is the fact that immediately prior to Kimmel's suspension, FCC chair Brendan Carr made a threat in response to Kimmel's monologue, saying, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead. If you go back to the second episode of this podcast, you'll hear us talking about how Trump has seized a level of control over the FCC that is unusual for US presidents. And in that episode, you'll also hear us predicting most of what is happening now. Not only did Kimmel's show get suddenly suspended, but the right-wing Sinclair broadcast group that is responsible for broadcasting Kimmel in certain parts of the US demanded Kimmel make a donation to Kirk's family and Turning Point USA, but Kimmel refused to apologize. Kimmel's suspension for his monologue was particularly shocking, considering that during the same news cycle, right-wing Fox News commenter Brian Kilmeade suggested involuntary lethal injection for the mentally ill homeless and literally said, "Just kill him." Those exact words. That is what he said. And what penalty did he get? He had to apologize for his comments. That's it. And while we're on the topic of inciting violence is on the table in the wake of the Kirk's assassination, it's worth noting that in the days following Kilmeade's comments, there were 2 separate shootings in homeless encampments across the city of Minneapolis. Kimmel isn't the first high-profile Trump-critical late-night host to be cancelled since the start of Trump's second term. Only months ago, CBS announced that it was bringing The Late Show with Stephen Colbert to an end. CBS is owned by Paramount, which in July paid $16 million to Trump to settle a frivolous lawsuit in order to get Trump's FCC to approve a corporate merger. On his show, Colbert called this a big fat bribe. Days later, Colbert's cancellation was announced by CBS, and days after that, the FCC approved Paramount's corporate merger. CBS insisted that the reason Colbert was coming to an end was a purely financial decision based on viewership. Never mind that I think Colbert is the highest viewed late-night host. Anyway, that doesn't make the timing any less interesting.
That's really interesting. I hadn't realized that the cancellation had come after Colbert had called the lawsuit settlement out as a bribe. You know, good on him. I'm going to be sorry to see the end of his show.
Yeah, most of the late-night hosts, especially Colbert, Kimmel, and Myers, the British guy, and Jon Stewart, are all very outspoken about what's been. They don't hold back. Let's say so about against Trump or against the corporations they're a part of. So yeah, that's exactly why what's happening right now is so scary, because they're some of the loudest voices calling out what's going on and they're being silenced. Trump, of course, was delighted by the news, literally posting, "Jimmy Kimmel is next to go, and shortly thereafter Fallon will be gone. These are the people with absolutely no talent. It's really good to see them go." He reacted in much the same way after the Kimmel cancellation, posting, "Great news for America. The ratings challenge Jimmy Kimmel show is cancelled. That leaves Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers, 2 total losers. Do it, NBC."
You're getting better. That's actually quite good. The total losers was perfect.
I've watched so many impressions of Trump, but actually doing it is really hard. So I have a new level of respect for the late night hosts, for one. So there we go. Anyway, a politician using their political power to silence critical entertainers is a violation of US law. In the NRA versus Vulu ruling of 2024, SCOTUS said officials can't use their power to pressure regulated entities such as banks and licenses to punish disfavored speakers. Hints and threats can cross a First Amendment line. If the regulator's suggestion feels like a threat, it probably is. And in the Moody versus Netverse choice ruling of 2024, SCOTUS emphasized that platforms and publishers' curation moderation is protected expression. And the First Amendment protects your right to speak and their right to program. But it turns out it actually is possible to push the American people too far after all. And the red line is apparently named Jimmy Kimmel. So yeah, the people were not happy with ABC and Disney. After the suspension, internet searches for cancel Disney Plus and cancel Hulu surged. And the cancellation pages for both streaming searches, because they streaming services apparently crashed because they received such intense traffic. Various members of Hollywood, such as actors and directors, declared that they wouldn't work with Disney so long as Kimmel remained cancelled. Hollywood unions came together to issue a joint statement condemning what they saw as a chilling of free speech. The other late-night hosts, including Stephen Colbert, Seth Meyers, Jimmy Fallon, Jon Stewart, and the British guy whose name I keep forgetting, but he's great too, all spoke out against the cancellation of on their own shows, with Jon Stewart turning his program into a parody of the sort of leader worship typical of countries like North Korea as a way of highlighting Trump's overreach.
This really does seem like what Trump expects, doesn't it? Like, he's so thin-skinned, he can't cope with any criticism at all. He just expects us to kowtow to him and, grovel. It really explains why he's expressed admiration for some of those other authoritarian leaders, like Kim Jong-un from North Korea and, of course, Vladimir Putin from Russia, because they do demand complete respect. And if they don't get it, then, someone's falling out of a hotel window or facing a firing squad. I feel like Trump would go there if he could.
He wants to be Vladimir Putin. It's so plainly obvious to me that that's exactly what he wants from life. He wants to be Vladimir Putin, and I can't understand how it's not obvious to everyone else. God. Anyway, what was most surprising, however, was that a number of figures on the right also condemned the cancellation. Although none of them liked Kimmel at all, and Kimmel spends a lot of his time making fun of them, they rather surprisingly saw an attack on free speech for what it was and realized that the same restrictions could apply to their own speech. Even Republican Ted Cruz, usually a Trump bootlicker, frankly, and object of mockery on Kimmel's show, said that the FCC chairman's car's threat was like something you'd expect out of the mafia, and warned that conservatives would regret normalizing it.
So I never thought that we'd be recognizing Ted Cruz for anything, but I guess that the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah, it feels really weird and gross to be agreeing with Ted Cruz on something, but my attitude towards life is that good behavior should be positively reinforced, so good on you, Ted, I guess. Anyway, so seems like ABC and Disney got the message, because after about a week, they announced Kimmel had been unsuspended. Kimmel was not forced to apologize, and when he returned, his monologue was as anti-Trump as ever. Although he did thank him for a ratings boost, and what a big boost it was. His monologue got 6 million views as opposed to the usual 1.5 million, and over 21 million views on YouTube so far. And this is despite Kimmel not even being aired in an estimated 25% of homes, thanks to the broadcasters Sinclair and Nexstar still refusing to play him. But a few days later they gave in after further focused view of backlash, and at the time of recording, Kimmel is being broadcast to all across the US once more. In his monologue, Kimmel spoke out in favor of free speech, pointing out that the ability to mock those in power is what separates the US from countries such as Russia and those in the Middle East. He also warned of ways that censorship in the US could escalate, suggesting that the Trump regime could use those powers to force cell phone companies and Wi-Fi providers to limit what podcasts and people are allowed to download if things continue to get worse. Should be a good topic for the podcast, maybe. Thanks, Kimmel. This is a good idea. He urged the American people to put the same energy they've been put into defending him into defending American democracy.
So I watched it on X, and it was hard not to get caught up in the emotion of it. I had never even watched Jimmy Kimmel's show before that, but I do like how late-night talk shows mix the horror of what's going on around us with comedy, because there's no other way to really process the authoritarian hellscape that America has become except by laughing at it.
If all Americans, if the majority of Americans watch late night, there's no way we'd be in the situation we're in right now. Because late night constantly calls out Trump every night, constantly highlights the hypocrisy of what he does. It shows what a ridiculous man-baby psychopath he is. And, there's no way you can watch that and for a second think that he's in any way fit to run a hot dog stand, let alone the most powerful country on earth. If everyone watched late night, we would not be in this situation. So I'm actually glad for all of this in the end of the day, because it put more eyes on Kimmel. And who knows, maybe it will make a difference in the long term, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. So far, it looks like free speech has won this battle, but we're still in the depths of the war. And the Kirk assassination does have some scary parallels with events that have happened in previous authoritarian regimes. For example, in Nazi Germany, there was a young man called Horst Wessel, a young Berlin street organizer for the Nazi SA, brown shirts. He was not a major thinker. He was a mid-level brawler and a talent for agitation. And he'd created a marching song that had become known as the Horst Wessel Lied. I think that's how they say it. And so in early 1930, he was shot amidst a murky political dispute involving the communists and died weeks later. The Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels saw this as an opportunity and went all in. He canonized him as a blood witness with posters, pamphlets, hymns, the works. He ritualized grief as loyalty, and the funeral became a mass spectacle. The man's song became a co-anthem of the Reich, and streets and youth groups bore his name. And mourning was turned into a test. If you can't keep quiet, you must perform the correct emotion, and any deviation, such as being disrespectful or insufficiently solemn, could mark you as an enemy. Does this all sound familiar? Yeah, so we're not in Nazi Germany yet, but we gotta be conscious of the fact that we could be getting there. And the fact that people reacted so strongly gives me some hope that we might not get there, but we can't let this energy just peter out. We got to be as outraged about this, about every outrageous thing the Trump regime is doing as we are about Kimmel, because that's the only way we're going to stop ourselves from basically ending up with two Vladimir Putins in the world. Yeah.
So you've said that maybe you're glad that all this happened because it sort of raised the possibility of a fight back, and I
just say I'm glad about the Kimmel cancellation and uncancellation, not about the guy getting murdered.
Of course. No, yeah. But the way that went down, and the fact that it got, you were saying it really went viral and gave him a much bigger audience. I find it interesting that his monologue got more views on the internet than it did on TV. It makes me think about how Tucker Carlson, the former Fox News host, has reinvented himself online and bypassed the traditional sort of media gatekeepers. He's become about as successful online as he was offline before, including hitting the #1 podcast spot at some point. So do you think that could be a solution if the TV networks continue to censor content that's critical of the Trump regime? Just pivot to online where it's harder for the gatekeepers to crack down?
Definitely, although we got to keep in mind that the viewership in, like, the TV viewership is like purely American, whereas the online viewers are from worldwide, and like Kimmel has fans from across the globe. He's doing a lot of the late night shows, including me. But it definitely is. We gotta look at all options, and the internet is probably the best option we have of keeping free speech alive. But at the same time, we've got to keep in mind that the internet itself can be censored. And I think that's part of what this podcast is about, is warning people of the ways that can occur and also telling people how they can get around it. I do think it is a lot easier to get around internet censorship than it is to get around broadcast censorship. So yes.
This is a tangent, but there's been some calls to crack down on things like VPN usage, right? As more and more countries get into the business of censoring the internet and putting up age gates and so on, more and more people are trying to find ways around it. And so not only VPN usage, but also usage of the Tor browser is skyrocketing. And that's kind of having the opposite effect to what the governments desire, because once more people start using the Tor browser, which is kind of uncensorable, there's also a lot of bad stuff there that they get exposed to, including CSAM and, drug markets and all of these things. And so I feel like it's not something you want to turn into a mainstream solution for getting around censorship. And it might be better to actually, relax the reins a little bit so that people aren't forced into these pirate mediums. I mean, another example of that is where pirate radio stations took off.
Yeah.
And especially in wartime as well, radio is an uncensorable, well, it's not completely uncensorable because it can be blocked, but that's something that has historically had a lot of usage during wartime to get messages out there that would otherwise be censored. So I don't think anyone should be believing that you can shut information down so easily these days. There's always going to be a workaround, and the more people you push into using these workarounds for censorship, it's kind of opening a Pandora's box where you're not just letting news get through, letting some other stuff get through as well.
I could imagine there being a sort of arms race between governments attempting to find ways to censor this information, and then the people pushing back and finding more and more ways to get around the censorship. So I guess we're going to wait and see.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it, an arms race. Yeah, I think. And we'll have further podcasts dealing specifically with those sort of topics, like banning of encryption, banning of, sex-themed information online, because it doesn't stop with just one topic.
So at the end of the day, I think my takeaway from this is that I agree with Jimmy Kimmel, and that I think Kimmel very much understands what's going on as much as we do. And he's aware of how what America is turning into. He is aware of how he is basically the canary in the coal mine. And he is absolutely right when he says that the American people need to wake the fuck up and realize that what's happened to him is a warning, and that they need to put the energy they put into defending him into defending their democracy and liberty as a whole. And I really, really hope people listen to him.
Exactly. I mean, because once it gets to a certain point, it becomes impossible to stop. And that's what we've found with fascist regimes in the past. Once they reach a certain point, it's not just so easy to flip the switch back to democracy again, because our institutions need to kind of be rebuilt. And so we're all hoping that, Trump just goes away in 4 years and things flip back to normal again, but it might not be that simple.
Yeah, absolutely. At this point, I'm wondering if the Democrats should just run one of the late night guys as their next candidate, because that's apparently what gets attention. Late night guys.
Well, there was a semi-serious proposal for Oprah Winfrey to run at one point. I don't know if you heard of that.
It worked.
Exactly. I mean, the only reason why Trump got in was because everyone knew him from The Apprentice.
Exactly.
And why do you think Arnold Schwarzenegger got in as governor of California? The Hollywood name recognition factor is, more important than you'd think. And a lot of these other right-wing people also, as well as some left-wing people, have become popular from either being on Big Brother or being on some other reality show, or it's very rarely because they've done a lot of hard work to get where they are. It's usually because there was some shortcut along the way, whether that's family connections, as in the case of RFK, whether it's TV celebrity, as in Trump's case. So I think, I'm all for it. If we can find a late night show, Jimmy Kimmel for president, why not?
Yeah. Kimmel Colbert 2028. Make it happen, USA.
Okay. Well, on that note, this has been, I don't want to say fun. It's been kind of traumatizing, but also...
Well, it's been like a late night episode, hasn't it? Fun, but also traumatizing.
It's been a release, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So thanks to everyone for listening. We'll be back again next month. Don't ask us what we're going to be talking about, because we don't know. All we know is that we'll be back again with another episode of Beyond the Filter. So we look forward to chatting with you.
Whatever the fuck happens next.
Exactly.
In this crazy ass world we're living in.
So thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.